Hold on to your seats because the geopolitical chessboard just went up in flames. While you were sleeping, the Kremlin didn't just move a pawn, they went for the king's ransom. We are talking about a full-blown high seas hijacking. Russia has officially started prep to seize an American oil tanker in what can only be described as the ultimate eye for an eye retaliation. Is this the spark that ignites a direct confrontation between the world's biggest nuclear powers? Or is Putin playing the most dangerous game of bluff in history? Stick around, because we're breaking down the moves that the mainstream media is too scared to touch. Yo, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel where we cut through the corporate fluff to give you the raw, unfiltered truth about what's actually going down in the world. And today is heavy. We're talking about a move so bold, so out there, that it feels like a plot from a Tom Clancy novel. But this isn't fiction. This is real life. And the stakes are literally millions of barrels of crude and the potential for World War III. Let's set the scene. Imagine an American-flagged oil tanker, a massive beast of a ship cutting through international waters, loaded to the brim with liquid gold. Suddenly, the radar pings. It's not just a passing vessel, it's the Russian Navy. The report hitting the wires right now is that Russia has officially begun preparations to seize an American oil ship. Now let us be real. Preparations is a fancy word for we were looking for the right moment to strike. This isn't just some random act of piracy like you see off the coast of Somalia. This is state-sponsored hijacking. Why now? Because the Kremlin is tired of playing nice. For months, the U.S. and its allies have been tightening the noose around Russia's economy. They've frozen hundreds of billions in assets. They've slapped price caps on Russian oil, and they've basically tried to delete them from the global financial system. Putin's response? You take my money, I take your ships. It is the ultimate checkmate move designed to show the West that their control over the seas isn't as solid as they think. When we talk about seizing a ship, we're talking about a massive logistical operation. We're talking about Spetsnaz boarding parties, electronic jamming to kill the ship's distress signals, and the kind of nerve-wracking standoff that makes the Cold War look like a playground tiff. If Russia pulls this off, they aren't just stealing oil. They are stealing American prestige. They are telling every shipping company on the planet, the U.S. can't protect you. The Pentagon is reportedly scrambling. You can bet your bottom dollar that there are P-8 Poseidons in the air and carrier strike groups shifting their headings as we speak. This is the red line everyone has been terrified of. If an American vessel is boarded by Russian forces, that is an act of war. Period. There's no oops, my bad in this scenario. But here's the kicker. Russia is painting this as a legal countermeasure. They're claiming that since the U.S. has stolen Russian property through sanctions, they have every right under their own domestic law to seize equivalent American assets. It's a total flip of the script. They're using our own legal jargon against us, basically saying, if you can freeze our bank accounts, we can freeze your tankers. This first move is a litmus test. They want to see how the Biden administration reacts. Do we send in the SEALs? Do we sink the Russian interceptors? Or do we try to negotiate while our ship is being towed into a Russian port? Every second the U.S. hesitates, the more the power dynamic shifts. This isn't just about one ship. It's about the precedent. If this goes through, the oceans are no longer a safe space for commerce. They become a battlefield. And for a world that relies on the free flow of energy to keep the lights on and the cars running, this is the nightmare scenario. We are watching the transition from a Cold War of bank transfers to a hot war of steel and fire on the open ocean. Stay tuned, because in the next section, we were going to peel back the curtain on the shadow war that led to this moment. We were talking about the secret financial moves and the frozen billions that pushed Russia to this breaking point. You do not want to miss this. All right, we're back. Now that we have established the what, the literal hijacking of an American ship, we have to talk about the why. Because look, Putin might be a lot of things, but he isn't stupid. He knows that touching an American ship is like poking a hornet's nest with a very short stick. So, what pushed him to the edge? It all comes down to the shadow war. For the last couple of years, the real fight hasn't been in the trenches of the Donbass. It has been in the back rooms of central banks and the digital ledgers of the global financial system. The West decided to go for the nuclear option of economics, freezing approximately $300 billion of Russian sovereign assets. Imagine you have a savings account with $1 million in it, and one day the bank just says, yeah, you can't have that. In fact, we might give it to your neighbor who you're currently fighting with. You'd be livid, right? Well, that's exactly what's happening. The U.S. and the EU have been debating whether to actually seize that money, not just freeze it, to pay for Ukraine Fight S reconstruction. To Moscow, that is the ultimate theft. They've been warning for months that if their money is touched, all bets are off. This ship seizure, the find out phase of the mess around and find out cycle. But there's more. Let's talk about the oil price cap. The G7 tried to be big brain about this. They said, okay, Russia, you can still sell your oil, but only if you sell it for less than $60 a barrel. It was a move designed to keep the world's energy supply stable while gutting Russia's profits. At first, Russia pivoted to a shadow fleet, thousands of old, rusted-out tankers with no insurance and fake GPS signals to bypass the caps. But the U.S. started hunting those ships down, sanctioning individual tankers and making it harder for Russia to move its black market crude. The Kremlin felt cornered, and a cornered bear doesn't just growl, it bites. By targeting an American ship, Russia is sending a message to the London insurance market and the global shipping hubs. If you try to block our trade, we will physically stop yours. It's a direct assault on the concept of freedom of navigation. Think about the dollar hegemony. For decades, the U.S. dollar has been the world's reserve currency because the U.S. Navy guaranteed the safety of the seas. You buy oil in dollars, and in exchange, the U.S. makes sure your ship doesn't get pirated. By seizing a ship, Russia is effectively saying the U.S. guarantee is worthless. They are trying to de-dollarize the world by force. If the U.S. Navy can't even protect its own ships, why would a country like India or Brazil trust the U.S. to protect theirs? This is also about domestic optics for Putin. He needs to look strong. With the war dragging on and sanctions biting into the lifestyles of the Russian elite, he has to show that he can hit the great Satan, as they like to call the U.S. in their propaganda, where it hurts. Taking a ship is a cinematic, high-impact move that plays incredibly well on Russian state TV. It says, we are a superpower and we will not be bullied. But let's be real for a second. This is a massive gamble. Russia is betting that the U.S. is too distracted by internal politics, the upcoming elections, and other global hotspots to start a shooting war over one tanker. They are betting that the American public has no appetite for another conflict in the Middle East or the North Atlantic. They are playing on our weariness. But here's where it gets really scary. What if they don't stop at one ship? What if this is just the beginning of a tit-for-tat maritime war? If the U.S. retaliates by seizing a Russian ship, we're in a spiral that ends in a naval blockade. And a blockade? That's the precursor to total war. In the next section, we're going to look at the wallet side of this. What does this high seas heist do to your gas prices, your heating bills, and the global economy? Spoiler alert, it's not looking good for your bank account. All right, let's get down to the brass tacks. You might be thinking, okay, some ship got grabbed thousands of miles away. Why does that matter to me? Well, buckle up because your wallet is about to feel the shock waves. The global economy runs on predictability. Shipping companies, insurers, and oil traders hate one thing more than anything else: uncertainty. The moment news broke that Russia was prepping to seize a ship, the war risk insurance premiums for every vessel in that region shot through the roof. We're talking about costs doubling or tripling overnight. And guess who pays for that? You do. Whether it's the gas in your tank or the strawberries at the grocery store that were shipped from overseas, everything gets more expensive when the ocean becomes a no-go zone. If Russia successfully holds an American tanker, we are looking at a permanent conflict premium on oil. Traders will start betting that any ship could be the next target. This could push Brent crude back over $100 or even $120 a barrel in a heartbeat. Remember those $5 and $6 gas prices we saw a while back? Imagine those being the good old days. But the real doomsday scenario is the choke points. The world has these narrow shipping lanes, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca. If Russia starts play-acting as pirates, they could encourage other players to do the same. Imagine if Iran decides to follow Russia's lead in the Persian Gulf. You're looking at 20% of the world's oil supply being held hostage. That's not just an economic dip, that's a global depression. We're also talking about the supply chain 2.0 nightmare. After COVID, we saw how fragile our systems are. Now, imagine a world where ships have to take the long way around Africa just to avoid potential seizure zones. That adds weeks to delivery times and billions to shipping costs. It's inflation on steroids. And let's talk about the food for fuel trade-off. Many developing nations rely on cheap energy to power their agriculture. If oil prices skyrocket because of this maritime standoff, we're not just talking about expensive gas in the U.S. We're talking about actual famine in parts of the world that can't afford the surge. Russia knows this. They are using energy as a weapon of mass destruction, and the seizure of a ship is just the latest trigger pull. There's also the technical side of the seizure. Oil tankers aren't just big boats. They are floating chemical plants. If a boarding goes wrong, or if a ship is held in a port without proper maintenance, the risk of an environmental disaster is massive. An oil spill in a contested zone would be a nightmare to clean up because no one would be able to agree on who is allowed to be there. The markets are already jittery. The S&P 500, the Dow, they're all watching this like hawks. If this escalates, we could see a massive flight to safe haven assets. Gold, Bitcoin, maybe even the very U.S. dollar that Russia is trying to destroy might actually spike because people get terrified. It's the ultimate irony. But the biggest economic fear? The decoupling. If the West responds by totally cutting off Russia from the maritime insurance market, the Lloyd's of London stuff, Russia might just form a new axis of shipping with China and Iran. We'd have two completely different global trade systems that don't talk to each other. That means the end of globalization as we know it. No more cheap goods, no more seamless trade. We're going back to a fragmented, expensive, and dangerous world. In our final section, we're going to look at the end game. How does this end? Is there a way out that doesn't involve missiles flying, or have we finally crossed the point of no return? We're laying out the three most likely scenarios, and trust me, you'll want to hear the last one. We've reached the final stretch. We've seen the seizure, we've analyzed the shadow war, and we've felt the economic shock. Now, the million-dollar question: how does this movie end? Because right now, the credits aren't rolling, and the tension is at a breaking point. There are basically three paths we can take from here, and none of them are particularly chill. Scenario 1, the cooling off, the diplomatic backdoor. In this version, the U.S. and Russia engage in some heavy-duty, behind-the-scenes Track 2 diplomacy. Maybe the U.S. agrees to unfreeze a small portion of assets for humanitarian reasons, and in exchange, Russia stands down its boarding parties. It's a save-face move for both sides. Putin gets to claim he forced the West's hand, and Biden gets to say he avoided a war without firing a shot. But let's be real, this is just a Band-Aid. It doesn't solve the underlying rage. It just kicks the can down the road. Scenario 2, the kinetic response, the shooting war. This is the one that keeps the generals at the Pentagon up at night. If Russia actually boards the ship, the U.S. might feel it has no choice but to use force to reclaim it. We're talking Navy SEALs, drone strikes on the escorting Russian vessels, and a full-on naval engagement. If a Russian sailor or an American sailor dies in that exchange, the Article 5 talk starts. NATO gets dragged in. Suddenly, we aren't talking about a ship anymore. We're talking about the plains of Europe and the silos in the Midwest. This is the escalation ladder that leads to the unthinkable. Scenario 3. The new normal. The piracy era. This is perhaps the most likely and the most depressing. Russia successfully seizes the ship, the U.S. responds with even more sanctions but stays away from a physical fight, and we enter a new era of state-sponsored piracy. The oceans become like the Wild West. Every country starts arming its merchant ships. Private military contractors like the modern-day Blackwater get hired to protect tankers. International law becomes a suggestion rather than a rule. We live in a world where trade is a constant gamble, and only the strongest or the most desperate survive. So where does that leave us? Honestly, we are in uncharted waters. Since the end of WTO, the freedom of the seas has been the bedrock of the world. If that crumbles, everything else goes with it. We're watching the dismantling of the post-war order in real time. But here's the friendly narrative takeaway. Don't panic, but do prepare. This is a reminder that the world is a lot more fragile than the for everything is fine. Headlines suggest, keep an eye on the energy markets, stay informed, and don't let the fear-mongering get to you. But don't be naive either. The Kremlin is playing a high-stakes game of chicken. They're hoping the U.S. swerves first. But in a game where both cars are loaded with nukes and oil, there are no real winners, only survivors. Whew, that was a lot. But look, this is the world we're living in now. It's fast, it's messy, and it's unpredictable. If you found this breakdown helpful, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss an update when things go sideways. What do you think? Is Putin bluffing, or are we about to see the first naval battle of the 21st century? Drop your theories in the comments. I'll be down there responding to the best ones. Until next time, stay sharp, stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.